I
It
think
said
we're
go.
live.
Yeah, it said
Yeah.
go.
I
2, 1,
I
go.
thought we were gonna have that weird introduction thing.
With the chickens and the 200.
Yeah. Whoa.
Yeah, there, that one.
It's always so much longer than I expect.
Just
Oh,
watching him mess around with the chickens.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I want to start this live by introducing the two of us because we are actually live on a few channels right now. We got the ERAG channels as well as mine. And so yeah, my name is Megs. I ride dirt bikes. I have a YouTube channel and I teach clinics across the country and I'm just generally passionate about our sport. And I am here with Chuck Harder.
I fix dirt bikes.
Okay, so we're gonna expand on that a little bit. Chuck is a really, I'm speaking for myself here. Chuck is a really amazing mechanic. He's well known for his abilities to, diagnose some pretty nasty problems, and I've been working with him as well as some people actually on the ground in Texas with me to kind of work towards diagnosing my problems that I've been having with my bike. So that's that's Chuck. I I keep gesturing in the wrong direction because the camera's mirrored.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll never learn.
I don't know why it does that.
Yeah, oh, we'll get used to it. Um, so yeah, I'm thinking we should get started by kind of, I guess, getting everyone up to date on what these problems have been and kind of where we started and where we're at now. I know a lot of people have been asking me, what did you find? What are your findings? Is the bike fixed? This, that, the other thing. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, you've been dealing with this problem for like 6 weeks now.
So the bike's been bad for about 6 weeks, like really noticeably bad. But I did notice the problem starting in about June. So the problem being my bike getting hot and overheating when it shouldn't. So all that started happening back in June. I noticed my bike boiled over in a situation where it shouldn't have. And then it kind of got progressively worse from there. So
Yeah, and your bike is not generally prone to boiling over.
no, no. I mean, I've had this bike. It's a 2018 TE 300 and I've had it for a couple of years now and it's never, I think I boiled it over once. And I was riding some crazy boulder field or something. It probably in 100 degrees and
Mhm.
um other than that it would never overheat ever. So once it started overheating every ride, even if it was just a flowy ride, I knew something was wrong. And then it started getting to the point where it was clearly running lean, and acting up and just simply not running well at all. So,
And then there was a period where you didn't ride it for a little while, right?
yeah. So that was, I came back from my big 5 month clinic tour and I needed a bit of a break and had a lot of stuff to catch up on. So I put my bike in my storage unit and it sat for 5 weeks. And then, so before I put it in the unit, it was rideable. And then after it sat for 5 weeks, I tried to go out riding. And, of course, I drained my fuel and cleaned out the carb. But I went out riding and my bike wasn't the same bike. It was uncomfortably lean and hot and pinging. And, it was it sucked to ride, and I knew something was wrong. So that's when I started trying to fix the problem, trying to look into it and figure it out.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, so that's kind of when we started talking and trying to figure out, okay, like what, what's going on now. I mean, you and I have worked together, enough that I mean, I know that when you say my bike is doing something different, I know that it's doing something different because I worked with a lot of people. You get kind of two opposite ends of the spectrum. Some people, you do something on their bike, like I make a change or something, and they don't feel anything. Turn the clickers all the way one way, they don't notice anything. I change the jetting or do some porting or they, change the tire. They have no idea. And you're pretty much the exact polar opposite. Um, like whenever there's a change on your bike, you notice it immediately. So right away, we have a really good like data source to pull from. So that's uh, that's really good for testing purposes. Because we talk, then you go out and test, then we make a change, then we talk, then we try something else. And it's been really interesting, being a few thousand miles apart to like diagnosing a problem from collaborating from up here, and you're down there, and you have some good help down there too. It's been a really interesting problem to like work through. Somewhat frustrating, but definitely
Yeah, I mean, it started out almost kind of fun because I like troubleshooting and trying to solve problems, and we had some really consistent data to go off
hmm
of. Right, it would be, exactly 10 minutes of riding, and it would start pinging at exactly 220 degrees every time, and it was consistent, which is it's not always the case with dirt bike stuff, right? It's something will happen and then it won't happen. And then, a week later it happens again, or you know what I mean?
yeah.
So,
That's one of the most frustrating things as a mechanic. And so well, maybe I should introduce my kind of like procedure.
yes.
Um, so whenever I get a bike in, somebody brings me a bike that has a problem, or when I have a problem with my bike, um, I have a specific procedure that I always follow. Um, and it's something that I've like developed over the years, and I'm sure a lot of other mechanics have a similar situation. But whenever I deviate from the procedure, it always bites me in the ass. So um, a lot of like what I find a lot is people want to jump straight to, like, there's a problem, and then they want to jump straight to, well, what's the fix? I have this problem. How do I fix it? And really, when that happens, you're kind of jumping over two or three steps. So my first step in solving any mechanical problem is verifying the problem. And that's what you were just talking about. We could verify the problem. The bike ran well when it was cold, and then 10 minutes into the ride, there was a change that happened. We don't know what the change was exactly, whether it was, or at that point anyway, we didn't know, like, is it is it running lean, or is it getting hot because of some other reason, or um, like at that point it's not, we're not talking about diagnosis, we're talking about verification. But we were able to verify very accurately, you were able to verify very accurately, like 10 minutes into the ride on this trail in this temperature, you know the the rad temperature, you had the temperature gauge, so at 220 degrees it started having this symptom, and it was repeatable. And that's a step that a lot of people skip. They're just, they experience a symptom one time, and then they try and fix it.
Yeah.
And so that's always step number one, is to verify the problem and get it repeatable. Um, so uh, we were lucky in this case that you definitely had a very repeatable problem to verify.
Lucky.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it repeated itself for 6 weeks.
Yes, it did, and it was nice because I I knew for sure. It wasn't just in my head, you know. Um, it was happening, and I had multiple people ride my bike as well and verify that yes, it is acting lean, it is acting hot.
Mhm.
Um, so
And this problem, if the problem with not doing a very solid verification step is at the end when you've solved, well, when you've made a change and then you go to test, like we'll come back to this later. And if you haven't verified extremely specifically, then um, it's really difficult to know if you've actually solved the problem or not.
right, yeah, and we're having that issue. I will get into that later, but
Yeah.
the end result that everyone's looking for isn't going to be as exciting as everyone thinks because I don't have the answers, at least not all of the answers.
Yeah, not all of them. And that actually, we maybe we should back up a little bit because before you start, or before I start any repair procedure, before I start verifying, what I need to know is what is the goal. And so, like you have different goals with your motorcycle. What is the objective? Your objectives are different than somebody who's riding, once a month or something. So with you, you
Hmm.
got clinics coming up, and you need a bike that you can ride. So whereas, like I have another bike here right now that it's not going to be ridden all winter. So with this bike, I'll do I'll do one little thing on it, and then I'll communicate again. I'll talk to the rider and be like, okay, this is where we're at, and this is kind of what it's going to cost, and this is where we're at cost wise. This is where we're at, mechanically. Then he'll be like, oh, okay, let's move on and do this next step. And then, so we're going to work through it over probably several weeks. But with you, if you have a clinic coming up, like we can't do that. So
Yeah.
sometimes it makes sense to skip some steps. If, you know, like racers, instead of trying to figure out what's wrong with the motor, you know, half an hour before a race, we just change the motor and then
Yeah.
make it work.
Yeah, and
And
that's
we
kind
did a
of
little bit of that with you.
yeah, I mean, at the beginning, it was, you know, make one change at a time and then ride it and see what happens, right? Because soon as you make two changes at a time, you don't necessarily know what has fixed the problem if
Mhm.
something's been fixed. And I wanted to keep it that way, but you know, weeks are going by and I'm getting closer and closer to my clinics and the bike's just consistently crappy, and yeah, it got to the point where I said, screw it, I'm swapping the motor, right? So swapped the motor and the problem didn't wasn't fixed. So
Mhm.
you'd think, oh, okay, that's simple then. It's got to be only a couple of things, right? The wiring harness, or the rads, or the hoses. I hadn't swapped those three things.
Mhm.
And but I'm running out of time, right? I'm getting behind on my content. I'm not doing my job. So it's like, well, I'm going to do all these. I'm going to swap it all right now and alleviate the problem
Mhm.
completely.
Well, and so this step that you're talking about right now, a lot of people think about it as the repair step in the procedure, but it's really what that step is the diagnosis. So
Yeah.
um, it's okay. We verify that the problem exists, and then we come up with a hypothesis as to what the problem could be, and then after we come up with a hypothesis, then we do an experiment and we test that hypothesis. So man, we tried all kinds of things, like, okay, well, maybe it's running lean. Okay, let's try and richen the carburetor up. So we have a hypothesis, it's running lean. um, the experiment is, okay, we add more fuel and see if the symptoms change. um, and that obviously failed. So okay, that's debunked. It's not, that was not the problem. So then we go in this constant feedback loop of hypothesis, experiment, result, hypothesis, experiment, result. And that's we did like a lot of that.
Right. And we went further than just, you know, trying to jet it differently and get it better. We went as far as okay, just in case this whole carb is faulty, we're going to try a whole nother carb and try to jet that thing. Oh, maybe this one's faulty too. Like I went through right now, I believe I'm on my fifth, I can't, it's fifth
Yeah,
carburetor. It's mirrored.
yeah.
um, but I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit right now, but my bike is running decently well right now. It's not perfect, and I'm on a fifth carburetor to make that happen. So, I mean, it's been a little more, it's not been as simple as just fixing a motorcycle. This has been a really hard to find problem, hard to diagnose, and I think people have underestimated, how intricate an issue can be on a simple machine sometimes.
Yeah, and um, that the problem with that is like because we're in this constant loop, like we haven't come up with a solid diagnosis. We haven't been able to run an experiment that yields solid, um, solid, like good quality results.
Yeah.
So everything that we're changing, all the parts that we're changing, everything we're just like looking for where is the problem coming from.
Yeah.
So you got verify that, like, first of all verify, then diagnose. Then the next step is order the parts. So once you have a diagnosis, um, that's the appropriate time to order parts generally. Now, with your case, we needed to order some parts in order to run some more tests to get a diagnosis. So like that can be okay too.
Hmm.
Um, but generally what you want to do is verify, diagnose, then change parts or do the repair, like do the work. And that was what I mean, we've done that as well as part of this whole thing with changing the crank seals on your bike too, because we were able
Right.
to we were able to verify and diagnose that it was burning transmission oil. um, and so we changed the crank seals, and then it is now hopefully not burning transmission oil. I mean, you're running a whole different motor now, but
Right. So, well, yeah, running a whole different motor. For a while there, it was smoking so much that I thought I was burning transmission oil after changing the seals again. And this time we changed the spacer and the O-ring on the wet side
mhm,
as well. So it was like this time it's good.
yeah.
Um, but it's been so weird because it's been running lean and hot yet smoking like a chimney and just giving off all the wrong vibes. It's been really hard to understand, and I think a lot of it has come down to carburetors. I hate to say it. I know there's been lots of small underlying issues adding up to all of this, but I think a big issue has just been carburetor problems. Um, yeah.
I think there were definitely some carburetor issues, but whatever we did with the original motor didn't solve the it didn't solve the overheating issue. Now, when I mean the last time, or I guess this, yeah, when the problem started changing, uh, that's when, so you changed parts, you changed the whole cooling system, like the
Yeah.
radiators and the hoses, um, and you changed the carburetor, and then things started working differently. Then,
Yes. And that's where I'm
then
like, I don't know if it was the radiators or if it was that carburetor, that silly carburetor. I should have changed them one at a time, but it was just time was of the essence, and I was sick and tired of the ordeal, so I changed them both at the same time and got some better results. And then
mhm,
with jetting, got even better results. Now the carburetor that's on it currently is a Kian, so it's easier to mess with because everything is independent. You know what I mean? You got the needle, you got the main jet, and you got the pilot. You can
mhm.
adjust all three of those independently without messing with one of the other ones. Whereas
Mhm.
before I was messing with lectrons and smart carbs and other electrons, and um, every time I tried to make an adjustment, I'm adjusting something I don't want to adjust.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that's the advantage with the key in that, like, there's a possibility, because we don't know exactly what the problem is. There's a possibility that it's running lean in the mid range and running rich on the bottom, or any combination of like of main, uh, needle and pilot. And yeah, with changing a metering rod, you're basically changing the whole spectrum, and it's very hard to diagnose very accurately when you have such a complex problem.
right, exactly. And so that's why I think that's partly why we started getting results with the key in on there. Because a big part of it was jetting. Now, why suddenly I'm having carburetor issues after years of just riding that bike and never making adjustments and just loving it, that to me is still a mystery. Was it the radiators? I don't know. I won't know, and the viewers are probably like, why did you do that? But I needed it to work, man. It's been
Well,
destroying me.
that's you always, that's like I said at the beginning, is like you always have to, and we talk about this at clinics all the time, with it's the same with riding techniques and gear and suspension, and you, you got to take your objectives into account. And right now the objective is, we need you to have a working motorcycle for your clinics. um,
Yeah.
so that's, you have to weigh, like, okay, do we spend more time messing around with diagnosis, or do we change a whole bunch of things and then hope the problem goes away? And it's a gamble. It is a
Hmm.
gamble, but with such a complex problem, sometimes it's like, okay, we need to throw some things at it, and see what happens, and to get a functional situation.
Right, and to save my mental state.
Yeah, yeah.
That
So,
that bike was inches from being in the dumpster.
yeah, yeah. The other frustrating thing is, um, generally with wrenching and like with diagnosis, you're looking for one problem. Um, it's not very often that, um, two failures happen at the exact same time, um, and cause a single issue. But it happens to me probably like once a year, where I get a bike and it's like, and I'm experiencing a symptom, and it's very hard to diagnose because there's two separate problems that have happened very close to the same time. And when that
Mhm.
happens, like, the complexity of the problem just goes like way, like, it can be very frustrating.
I think that's been a part of what's been going on with this bike because remember when I started thinking that maybe my crank seals were done, or at least the wet side, the
Yeah.
clutch side, back in June. And but at the same time, my old Electron carb was seeming to have issues as well. It seemed worn out. Um, the float was sticking, and the slide was worn past their recommendation, their spec or whatever.
Was that the
So
one that was cracked, or was that earlier?
no, that was a slide. That was the slide after the cracked slide. So this that was I
Okay.
wore that one out, and then I put another slide in it and wore that one out.
Hmm.
Um, so I had two problems coming together to make my bike act weird, and that's where it all started.
Mhm. And there may be a third issue, like there may be an issue inside that motor that we don't know about yet.
Right. So that the original TE motor, I haven't even torn into it yet because the goal was to get a running bike going. So I put the other motor into the other bike and have been messing with that. Now that it's rideable, I guess the next step is to look into the other motor, any just to see. I mean, it could have just been rads and a carburetor or one of the two, but the motor's out of the bike. May as and it's never had a bottom end. um it's got over 500 hours on it. May as well look into it.
Yeah, so this is another one of these cases where, okay, the motor is out of the bike. Do we just take it apart and go through it, and rebuild the bottom end, or do we put it back in a bike and get it running again with, you know, with the known good radiator setup to test and diagnose and see if that's an issue, or do we just go ahead and we
Mhm.
replace the bottom end, and then we put it together and have it work or not work?
I kind of like the idea of the second one just because I'd like to test it and see if that motor is still totally fine
Yeah,
because I believe that my bottom end is okay. I
I think
believe
so.
that in my heart. um, I've done nothing to that bike to merit harming that bottom end. But I, I get it. Hours on the bike can wear it out. But
Oh
anyways,
yeah.
I would like to put the motor in a frame and like back in the frame with the good rads and the good carburetor and see if the thing runs well.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of how much time do I have and how insane am I willing to go if it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes you got to think like, okay, what are we going to think like in 5 years? How valuable is that information going to be versus,
Right.
um, spending a month or two riding instead of fixing?
Right. Yeah.
So you're at a point now where it's not overheating, right?
Correct. It's not. And I made darn sure of that. I rode the same loops with the same people um, for the same amount of time, and where it would normally overheat, it didn't.
Mhm.
Um, what I'm dealing with that I'm not used to, and that my what my bike didn't used to do is kind of this lean sounding pipe bang on the D cell, and that triggers me and makes me think my bike's running hot because
Mhm.
that's what it did every time it started to overheat and get hot. I'd get that
Mhm.
a gung 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 on the D cell.
Yeah.
So it's still doing that a little bit. Nothing horrible. Like I've ridden other people's bikes that do it a lot more than mine, but mine never did that at all. So now when I hear it, I'm like, "Argh," like, it's lean. It's
Mhm.
lean. The world is ending.
Yeah.
But I also need to remember this is a whole different motor. And this, I don't know this motor well enough to say it never
Mhm.
had this. Um,
Not to
so yeah,
mention that it's not a stock motor.
right. It has that high compression head on it.
Yeah, it's got a head and it's ported as well. So
Right.
uh, it's a totally different animal than the TE stock motor.
Yeah, and I'm feeling that. Like this bike has loads of power, way
Mhm.
more than I'm used to. Um, it got to the point last weekend I was jetting it with my friend Cole and Jake. That they've been helping me through this whole thing as
Mhm.
well. And Cole got it like really jetted well. But it was so powerful, it wanted to rip right out of my hands. Like I was blowing corners because I was picking up more speed
Yeah,
than I
yeah,
thought I would, and it was fun. It was a riot. I couldn't stop smiling, but when it comes to riding the super gnar and trying to do, trying not to have wheel spin in slippery situations,
yeah,
that bike, it's going to be a monster. I'm going to despise it. Like,
yeah, yeah. That's like that's a whole interesting. I mean, I really enjoy that part, like tuning all that and getting the engine working like exactly the way that it works for you or for for an individual, because everybody's different and
yeah.
everybody's got different objectives and everybody's got different riding styles. um, and um, I mean, you got clinics coming up, but I'm sure that we're gonna at some point dial the motor back so that it's smooth and torquey and not and doesn't put quite so much of a smile on your face.
Right. I mean, for the clinics this weekend, at Red River, um, I'm probably just gonna have the bike as is, and
Mhm.
like it'll be fine. I actually jetted it crappier, if that makes sense. Like we got it to a point where it was running really, really well and it had so much power. So I actually made it leaner and for whatever reason, like it's not bad lean enough to make the bike hot or anything like that, but it made it a little more mellow. Um so I'm not super happy with how it's running, but it's more mellow, and I think I'd prefer that for the clinics.
When it's doing the pipe bang thing, is that the way that it's jetted now, or when it was jetted richer, or both?
It's doing it both. It was doing it more when it was jetted richer. Um, and I am not sure if that's a Jake talked to me about there being you can have a lean condition making that sound or a rich condition making that sound. And maybe, I mean, maybe it was excess fuel um detonating making that pipe bang sound. I'm not sure. But like I
It's
don't think it was doing that because it was hot.
Mhm. Well, you said like you could feel the way it was heating up before. It was like you could feel the heat like on your
Yeah,
legs, right?
yeah, it was like melting my legs, and
Yeah.
I could feel it in my boots.
Yeah.
And I warped ahead.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
for all the
Yeah.
people that were saying, "Oh, it's in your head." No, it wasn't in my head. I warped ahead. So for a while there, I didn't post any of the footage, but one day I went riding and I was burning coolant and it was just white smoke all day. And it was really hard to keep the bike from stalling. And it was just a struggle, but I had to get the content. For my YouTube channel. It was my only day. So I wrote it like that. And then I got it apart after that ride and coolant all over the top of the piston.
Mhm.
Spark plug was squeaky clean.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, well, now the head's warped from all the testing we were doing to see if it truly was getting hot.
Mhm.
We got it hot.
Well, I'm when I mean when you and I talk about bike issues that are having, I mean we've worked together long enough that it's like I don't have to wonder if you're feeling it or if it's like an actual thing. Um,
Right.
say but in the spectrum of feeling stuff on the bike versus not feeling stuff on the bike, like you're definitely the princess and the pea. Uh,
Right. Well, and I know that bike like the back of my hand, right? I've had that bike for years now, and I've had similar bikes prior for multiple years. So I've never had issues with 300s overheating. And as soon as that started happening to me, especially when I wasn't even doing anything worth,
mhm.
you know what I mean, just flowing through the trails and it starts to overheat. It was just like, no, something's not right. It's
Yeah.
not right.
No, and when you say it's not right, I know that it's I know that it's not right.
Right.
Um, and stuff like I mean, I have a 300 and I have like my head is pushing more compression and it's more aggressively set up than yours and I have never boiled my bike over. Sometimes it gets a little bit hot, but I don't even like I don't run a rad fan. I don't run any special kind of coolant, nothing like
Right.
that. A 300 two-stroke does not need a rad fan. If you're running a stock motor, like they just don't run that hot.
Right. And I think a lot of people find that hard to believe because I dealt with a lot of comments saying it's because your fan's not working.
Yeah.
And I'd like to yeah, I know in my heart that that bike would run perfectly fine with no coolant in it at all for a long time before it exhibited symptoms of it being hot.
Yes. Yes,
Never
that's
mind
true.
needing a fan. I understand the need for a fan if you're racing extreme enduro. Like, yeah, of course, give your bike all the chances in the world to stay cool. But the not having the fan on my bike was not a cause of any of these issues.
No, and um I think the rad fan is kind of I like the way that you said it, like give it every chance that it gets so that in case you overheat, in case something goes wrong, you have a rad fan. Um, but it's kind of like, I like to think about it as fixing the problem on the front end versus the back end. And a lot of people don't think about fresh fuel and air coming into the cylinder, especially fresh fuel. Fresh fuel comes in and it cools the engine. And if on a 300, with a 60,000 squish setup, or like, if you're running 150 psi, which all the XCWs, all the TEs, they're all running roughly 150 psi. Like, there's no reason that should overheat if it's jetted correctly,
Yeah.
or if the fuel map is correct. There's no reason for a 300 or a 250 to overheat. Um, like, the bike can sit in the parking lot for an hour and not overheat. Um, you should be able to pull hill climbs for 5 minutes and not have it overheat. Like, you have to push it really, really, really hard in order for it to overheat if the engine's set up correctly. And yours obviously was.
It was running great, and this is the problem. I had this unicorn of a bike that I just absolutely loved. I bought it because my friend Quinn lent it to me when I flew down to do a clinic with him. So since I was flying, I needed a bike. I hopped on his bike thinking, oh gosh, like it's going to be weird teaching a clinic on a strange motorcycle. And within 5 minutes of being on his bike, I was a better rider than I was on my own personal bike back home. And I
Mhm.
looked at him and I said, would you sell me this? And he said, okay. And ever since then, and it had electron carb on it, okay? And for me, I've always been all about the key in because, a properly tuned key in is always going to run better than electron. I'm not ripping on that brand by any means, but those
No.
carbs are they're great for someone who doesn't want to ever make adjustments. And they're great for people who travel and are constantly at different elevations. But
Mhm.
his bike had electron on it and I loved it. And so I never touched it.
Mhm.
It's been 2.5 years, I think. Never touched it, never made any adjustments, loved it to death. And then when it started acting up, I've been chasing this unicorn. I've been like,
Mhm.
I need it to work just how it did before. And it's like, well, that carb could be worn out, that carb's got as many hours on it as the bike does.
Mhm.
Um, and those carbs wear out, unlike key-ins and things like that, or at least I know the slides do. Um,
Yeah, it is
so
possible for a key in to wear out, but like Kevin's bike, he's got he had over 400 hours on his stock carburetor. Um, so key-ins do wear out as well. But
right.
it comes back to that objective thing. Uh, like I had Electron on my bike for the better part of a season, and I liked it in some areas and not in others. And I
Hmm.
ultimately went back to the key-in because uh, I'm I like my bike to run like really in a really specific way. And the needles that were available, the metering rods that were available, didn't quite suit what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Um, although, like, you're exactly right, the bike ran the same, like, every weekend. It didn't matter where I was riding. I mean, I wasn't changing elevation a huge amount. But if your goal is, like, riding at different parts of North America every weekend, you don't want to deal with jetting every weekend. But somebody who's riding at the same elevation every week, um, it might make more sense to have a key in. It depends.
Right. And I would be willing to jet my bike every weekend if it meant ultimate performance. And that's why I was always on the key in side of things. But I had that carburetor, that electron that was on my bike was magical. It had
Hmm.
the crisp, like instant bottom end power that I loved, like right off of idle. But it still performed well at high speeds and at high RPMs, and it was crisp, it was perfect. And I think that carb was just special because I've been trying to tune a new one to be like that, and it's been nothing but problems. And I think it might even be a part of why my bike was overheating. I think that carb might have had problems, but
It's possible. I mean, sometimes they have issues with the floats getting stuck. The smart carbs and electrons both seem to uh, sometimes have that issue. It's solvable, um, but it needs to be acknowledged. And
yeah,
sometimes that happens, and that's okay. Kians have other problems. Um, so yeah, whatever you run, there's going to be different variables that you have to deal with when you're picky with your setup.
right, right. I just wish parts never wore out. I just want it to be like it always is, forever and ever and ever.
Wouldn't wouldn't it be wouldn't it be so nice?
Yeah, it would be amazing. Um,
For me, like er, when I get a new bike, then it's like, okay, I got to take it apart. Well, I mean, we're the same for like opposite reasons. Like I got to spring stiffer, and I got to mess with valving. I like my valving in a certain way. As do you. You're more picky with your suspension than I am with mine. But having to get that all figured out with a new bike, and you get your suspension done, and uh, if they nail it, it's amazing, and if they don't quite nail it, then it's like, well, like do I get it done again, or do I like um, and then carburation and fuel, and then the little stuff like what hand guards do you want, or like me, I put double grips on my bike because I have gargantuan hands.
yeah, it's like
I have a lever, my clutch lever on my bike. I've switched it from my KTM to my Sherco, and now it's on my Beta because I love the
yeah,
lever so much.
yeah,
But one of these days, it's like something's gonna happen.
right, yeah.
But people
It's
don't like people. What I run into a lot is, um, as I'm talking with people about their bikes, and about some issue that they're having, oftentimes other little issues will creep into the conversation that they don't even know are solvable. um, like if like people with short fingers, like uh, it can help to put thinner grips on. Like I put fatter grips on, it can help to put thinner grips on, and like
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I run the
uh,
thinnest grips possible.
mhm. Yeah, and that it makes a difference when you're picky
Mhm.
with your setup, and things like when you put a new shifter on your bike. This happened to me recently. I My shifter finally broke, and I put another one on, but it stuck out a little bit more than the stock one did, and I was like kicking it, so I cut a 1/4 inch off, and that made a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
But all that stuff with a new bike, like that's all stuff that has to be like redone and refigured out.
right. Yeah. And for me, I mean, I never used to be super picky until I got things that I really liked. Like, I used to run stock suspension for a long time as a
Yeah.
125-pound rider. Um, and then I had my suspension done by different companies. And, you know, I didn't have anything. It didn't make a huge difference for me. And then when I found Suspension Works and they did my setup, it's been life-changing for me. So
Mhm.
it's been a good thing because it's allowed me to really elevate my skills, but it's also kind of a curse because I don't even want to buy a new bike because I'm scared that I'll never have that. So now if I
Mhm.
buy a new bike, it's got to have be compatible so I can put that exact physical suspension off of my old one
Mhm.
onto it and then try to get the other one done the same because I don't trust that it'll ever be that good, right?
Yeah, I think about suspension uh, like when I do suspension, it's the rider should go out and just not think about the suspension at all.
Yeah,
Uh, if you think about your suspension, then there's something wrong.
right.
The problem is like the suspension on your bike is so dialed, like it's so good, Like James has done a super excellent job with it. And then as soon as you ride something that's not quite as good, then you notice it.
Right. Yeah. It's
It's like trying to sleep and there's a fly buzzing around in your room
exactly.
and it lands
Yeah.
on your face.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Um
Did we finish the procedure? I think so. We got to, so we did verify, diagnose, um, repair. Uh, and then did we talk about testing?
uh no, because well, kind of. With the stage we got to with my bike was kind of testing, but not really because we don't know exactly what. Um
Yeah. So with yours, we got back to, okay, so verify, diagnose, repair, verify, diagnose, order parts, repair, and then test again. And so this is what I was saying at the beginning. If you didn't verify and you don't have a repeatable problem, um, uh, then testing at the end is impossible to do because you don't have anything to compare it to.
right.
So now with yours, I mean, so it's not overheating. So there is like legitimate testing that you've been doing. Like it's not overheating anymore. We've got
Right.
it back to a point where okay, the bike works well, and everything's okay, and now you've got the jetting, you know, pretty well dialed. Um, Now the next, I mean, there's always a next problem, but the next problem, is like, okay, now we just need, now we're back at like a neutral zone, and now we can tune um, to get the bike working better for the way that you want to ride it.
Right. Well, and we still have to see if there's anything wrong with the other motor. Like remember, we've only got my bike working with a new motor in it.
This
Um
is this is true.
like so it's a giant like it's it's a tangly mess. And that's why I haven't been making posts about the grand discovery because there is no discovery yet. It's been a mess and all I know is that the bike works well enough now that I can teach my clinics this weekend and I can continue to create content
Mhm.
in the meantime. But there's still a long ways to go if we do want to continue kind of testing with the other motor.
Yeah, and well, also with this motor too, right? Because we need to drop the compression down a little bit and do some motor changes and stuff. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I need a stock head for that bike.
well, the TE, you um the TE head is it's it's stock, right? And like it was warped a little bit, but
Yes, but Jake fixed it,
yeah.
but it's not like a brand new stock head.
Yeah.
For testing purposes, it might be better for me to order a new one, but I think I could try the TE head.
It'd be worth it. I think it'd be worth it. Because like with the setup, we need to change the base gasket as well. And what'll be really interesting for me anyway is because it's ported, it's not going to be exactly like stock. But hopefully, what we can do is like when I port an engine, the idea is to get it to work to work more efficiently.
Mhm.
So take all those little bumps and stuff out so that the air flows around like an airplane wing kind of a thing. And it atomizes fuel. So hopefully, what we can do is get it working better than stock, so it's more torquey down low and smoother than stock, if that's possible. It's possible,
Is it
but it's
though?
just
Is it I'm not sure if it's possible to get this motor running better than the other motor was when it was perfect. Like
oh, it's not a
I'm
question
just
of if it's possible. It's a question of do we want to put the amount of work in that it takes to do it.
right. I mean, it would be worth it in the long run if I could have the bike the same or better. Um,
Mm.
I'm just negative. I have like PTSD over this whole thing.
Well, and it's really hard to make engine changes from uh, you know, being in BC versus being in Texas, like, so like, and having poor cell reception and not being like, you go and test and then you get a result and then we talk about it, a couple of days later, and then then we make another change. So it takes a week to make a change every time.
Well, and especially because I find that I have to go to my riding area to do testing because
Yes.
anytime I try to test it at Jake's shop or at my storage unit or anything like that, I don't put it in the conditions that it needs to be put into for
Mhm.
testing. So I got to drive to the riding area, which is, an hour and a half away. And then, so I go do that once a week with one change, and it takes forever.
Yeah, it's not like you're in BC where you can just ride out of your front door.
Right. No, it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
But we'll get it. I'm happy where it is right now. I'm happy. Um, the bike definitely needs to be tuned, but like jetted a little differently. But I'm happy with it.
That's that's something that, like what you mentioned about, like, you got to go to your riding area to test because it doesn't act the same when you're riding around the parking lot. That's something that I deal with a lot too. Is I think that's one of the big things about communicating when, like, when we're trying to solve complex problems. So like when somebody brings their bike to a shop, and or like when somebody calls me with a bike problem, oftentimes I'll get something like, "Oh, I was riding and it shut off." And um, I think one of something that a lot of people miss is, what I want to know is, like, okay, you were riding and it shut off. Okay, what was the temperature? I want to know if it was raining or not. I want to know if you were going uphill or downhill. I want to know. I want to know if you when the last time was that you changed your oil or cleaned your air filter, or I want to know if you hit a tree that day, or if a bird like shat on your bike, or like I want to know every little detail that I can possibly know, um, that might give me a hint as to what might be going on.
Right.
And I mean, I mean, you have so many hours on your bike that, like, I mean, it doesn't even work, like, to test your bike in a parking lot. You got to drive an hour and a half so that it's the same situation, like this. I mean, we can't control the weather, but that's about the only variable that we can't control.
Right. No, I am the queen of detail. I'll notice, what gear I'm in, what RPM I'm at. In order to test it, I kind of have to be in a situation where I can put it under load. I can be on the clutch, I can be lugging, I can be ripping, I can do all of the things, and then I can recreate the issue. I can get it to happen again if it's still there, right? Whereas in the parking lot, there's a few things you can do, of course, but it's not the same, and it lets me down. I'll be like, I think it's fixed. I think we're
Mhm.
good. And then I get out there, and then sure enough, at the same point on the same trail at the same time of day in the same temperature, the problem comes up again and
Mhm.
rears its ugly head, and there I am, just like fuming. Um, so there's no more messing around with thinking it's fixed at the shop or in the parking lot. I just got to take it out there and really put the bike to the test.
Yeah, that's part of, like, diagnosing, because before, like, we don't know exactly what the problem is, and maybe the problem is environmental. Like, maybe it's something that's, you know, like with Kevin's bike recently, we were having trouble. Like, it would run great, and then all of a sudden it would just like randomly shut off, and we narrowed it down that it was whenever he ran through a puddle, it would shut off, and then,
Right.
but that was like, we were testing, testing, and then, we were out testing one evening. Bike was running great. We're like, okay, cool. Let's, whatever. It's running great. Let's wrap it up. And then he rode through a puddle and it died. And we're like, oh, like, holy crap. What? So then we started like playing with water. And it turns out that there was like a little tiny crack in the wire that in the high tension lead coming off of the coil. So like the bike started up again, and then like we squirted it with a bottle, like a little squirt bottle with water, and the bike shut off. It was like uh we worked on that problem for so long, and it was so intermittent and so frustrating to if it was dry, there was no problem, but it took
Right.
it some I think one morning it was like it was uh it was wet out or something. It wasn't raining. And like, yeah, it took us a while to figure out that moisture was the factor.
Right. That that's got to be satisfying though when you get that answer.
Oh yeah, yeah, when there's like a problem that's frustrating and then you get a smoking gun, that's awesome. I mean, we don't have a smoking gun with your problem yet, but sometimes you don't get it. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't.
Right. No. I mean, again, not getting it is because I've been skipping steps and changing multiple things at once just in an attempt to get it fixed, but I knew that in like while I was doing it. It's just it is what it is. I need
Yeah,
it
I mean,
fixed.
yeah, it's objectives, and with you, it's like we have a deadline. You got clinics. It has to like you need to have a bike for that day, and for other people, it's um, you know every hour that the bike sits on the bench, the clock is ticking, and it costs money. And if I'm spending, oftentimes I gotta make a recommendation, like, okay, do we change a bunch of parts and save some time, or do we spend a little bit more time and save money on parts?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think that's something um, that I think is really important that often gets missed, is that kind of stuff needs to be discussed with the person who's who owns the bike.
Mhm.
It's yeah, it keeps coming back to objectives.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of, and I don't know if this will ever happen. I know the technology exists already, and I can do it to a certain extent, to like plug in a fuel injected bike and then go for a ride, and have it record all the sensor data from what's going on. And maybe in the future that will uh, cut down our diagnosis time uh,
Yeah. That would be
substantially.
pretty sweet.
It would be cool.
Maybe one day. That's if I ever jump off that cliff into fuel injected two strokes. That
Oh, it's
that is
only a matter of
that is a
time.
topic for a whole nother video.
Hmm.
Because I am currently thinking about somehow, some way getting into a new bike, but we shall see. Maybe it's time for a big change. Oh man. Anywho, so we've been at this for an hour, which is hard to believe
Yeah.
because it feels like we've been talking for 15 minutes. Um, but I did mention on my platforms that people could send in a couple of questions if to ask you, Chuck, um, that are just related to bike issues or whatever. I made a little list here.
Okay.
Do you want to cover just a couple of them before we call
Yeah,
it?
sure. Sure, let's do it.
Okay. Ground under. Good day. Who is Chuck Harder? So I'm gonna answer that real quick because I know
Okay.
we introduced you at the beginning, but I forgot to mention that Chuck, he has his own business. It's called True Tech, and so he is a fixer of all things motorcycle. And do you do other things too, other than bikes right now, or is it just
No, not currently. I love things with two wheels and motors, and I feel like I feel like it adds value because I specialize in things with two wheels. I'd rather do a small amount of things really well
right?
than
Awesome.
I don't
Um,
fix lawnmowers and generators.
So Chuck is the guy you want to take your bike to. Um, if you want it done right, you don't have to worry about dirt falling into your motor or things getting stripped or issues getting swept under the rug with Chuck. Not trying to embarrass you, but he really is one of the best mechanics I've ever met. And he is a big reason why I've learned so much about wrenching on my own machines. And yeah, so that's Chuck Harder. Okay, so I started writing these down and then I got distracted, and they're actually on my Instagram because I
Okay.
am a dummy. So let's just I'll pick one more. One
Okay.
more. Um hmm. There's a big one there. We're gonna save that one for another day. Hang on. Bear with me. Um Gosh, I'm so unprepared. Okay, here we go. Now, do you want to answer the oil thickness one, Chuck?
Well, what is it?
All right. So this is from Hard Enduro Bosnia, and he's wondered.
Let's get some oil thread happening in the comments.
Yeah. So we'll be going for another hour.
Yeah.
So he says oil thickness, effects on clutch feel, gradation, gear oil versus engine oil, and so on. So
Okay, so I think I should answer part of it, and you can answer another part of it, because
okay.
you recently had an issue between gear oil and engine oil, um,
Yep.
and so I'll let you talk about how that felt.
Okay.
Um, uh, but what a lot of people don't understand is that there's two ways of um, identifying oil thickness. So you have your typical like 10W40. So the W in 10W40 does not stand for weight. It stands for winter. So the guy that invented it, his last name was Winter, I think. But so a 10W40 is roughly the equivalent thickness as an 80 weight. So 80 weight is a straight weight oil. As it warms up, it gets thinner. So 10W40, there's a spectrum. So when it's cold, it'll act like a 10 weight so that it distributes quickly. And when it's hot, it'll act like a 40 weight so that it has the shear strength and the like abrasion resistance and stuff. So a lot of people get confused when they're talking about 75 weight or 80 weight. And they're like, well, that sounds way thicker than a 10W40, obviously. Well, it's because there's two different units of measurement happening at that point. So and then you also have, so the difference between gear oil and engine oil, um, broadly speaking, is that gear oil, uh, like maybe I should specify, like car oil, some oils have friction modifiers in them, and oils that are designed for wet clutches don't have friction modifiers in them. So if you're running an oil that has a friction modifier, it's slipperier, and it's gonna and it's gonna act differently in your clutch, and it can potentially damage your clutch. So that's the difference. Like a lot of people talk about like Rotella or diesel oil versus car oil versus motorcycle specific oil, and most diesel oils don't have friction modifiers, so it's not going to damage your clutch. And there's other pros and cons to running them, um, but that's the main difference. So you were recently running an oil in your transmission in your clutch that had a friction modifier in it.
Okay. So we're gonna backtrack.
Sure.
As soon as when I first moved to Texas, the first shop I went to, I don't even remember what it was called, and I'm not going to mention names anyways. But I went in there looking for my Bellray gear saver. You know me, I'm a creature of habit. Bellray gear saver works great, and so I stick with it. And they were like, "Oh, we don't have gear saver. We don't have Bellray." And I was like, "But I need it." And they were like, "Oh, don't worry, we have something better." And I had red flags going up for days because
Alarms.
um right. And they gave me this oil. I can't even remember what brand it is. What is the brand that's a black bottle with purple writing? Maxima.
Yep.
Um but it was differential oil for like gold wings. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, don't judge me. All right. I had to buy it because I was in a pinch and I didn't know. I didn't know. I put it in my clutch, and so that oil has the additives that we're not supposed to have in our clutches. And those additives make your clutch slip. And it also soaks into your friction plates and can damage them. So,
Yes.
anyways, I had that in my clutch, and I noticed right away it wasn't good. And I noticed soon enough where I drained the oil and then I flushed it with um, proper Bel-Ray, and I saved my plates. I didn't have to replace them, but I noticed it. My clutch was slipping. It was acting weird. It was super horrible, and that's why you don't want to run the wrong oil. And yeah, so lesson learned there. Don't run Goldwing differential oil in
Mhm.
your clutch. It's not good.
I feel like that's a pretty good. That's pretty. I feel like that's a very practical answer. So, like, you noticed right away that you could feel the difference. Your clutch was slipping like crazy, and that's because of friction modifiers, and there's two different viscosity units when it comes to oil. So, yeah, that's
Right.
all that I have to say about that.
Okay. There's a little piece of information before we call it a day that I think is really valuable for people who are in a pinch and they have to go to like Lordco or AutoZone for gear oil, because we've all been there on a
Oh yeah.
Sunday, right? Can you
Yes.
do you want to tell them about the symbol? And okay.
Yeah. I'll grab some. Where do I have? Let's see. I'm looking for the symbol.
I know you have a big old jug of diesel oil in there somewhere.
Oh, I got all kinds of stuff hiding in here. Uh, Man, this doesn't even say it. Where does it say it? Okay. Oh, it's really hard to see. Usually it's like a big badge. But this is some Maxima stuff. Where okay. JSO MA. That is a clutch rating. So that
Yeah, normally it's like a big badge that says MA
yeah,
slash
it's a
MA2 or something, right? Like you don't even really have to look for it. But
no. Usually, oh, here's a big one, a bigger one. MA.
nice.
That that is the clutch compatibility badge. That means it's safe for your clutch. And there's MA and there's MA2 and like there's a whole bunch. So there's like JSO. The two main um, oil rating um, systems are JSO and API. And if you Google them, you'll get a whole like it says it shows it really clearly. Um, but so JSO and API are two different standards of rating oil. So if you ever need to get oil and the brand that you normally use is not available, that's actually an excellent point. Um, that for the clutch rating, you want to look for that MA symbol.
Right. Otherwise it has those dreadful additives in it that aren't good for clutches.
Yes.
Cool. Um
I wonder
so
if I wonder if this Rotella has it.
the Rotella in the white bottle.
Oh, look at this. This is for my truck, by the way. JSO MA/MA2.
Mhm.
So
Nice.
this is my truck. My truck oil is certified for clutches.
Yep. Awesome. Um So I think we'll wrap it up before we bore everyone to death with our clutch information.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was an absolute pleasure, Chuck. Thanks for coming on. That was a good one.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, we always have a good time when we talk about nerdy tuning things, and yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Well, the next one is going to be really good, and I think the viewers are going to love it. So,
yeah, we
guys,
got some ideas.
we have some really cool stuff in store for you. So, we hope to see you again soon, and just thanks a lot for being there in the comments. I wasn't able to read them all. I'm sure there's probably plenty of inappropriate comments, and
Hmm.
hopefully plenty of mature good ones. So, we appreciate you guys being here.
Yeah, thank you for spending an hour talking.
For sure. All right. I will